Good afternoon, everybody. Um, thank, thank you very much for uh, attending today. My name is Tucker Holland. I am the housing specialist for the town of Nantucket. And the first thing you need to understand about me is I loathe public speaking. To put it in perspective, if the choice were to be public speaking or crawling through the sewer pipeline around the corner to do an up-close inspection of the currently strained system, I may well choose the latter. Nevertheless, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm genuinely honored and grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you here at the NHA, an institution for which I have a lot of reverence and admiration. Bill and Peggy Tramposh were and still are good friends, and it's been a privilege to already have started to get to know James. I'm confident that the NHA's past success will continue to grow under his leadership. Indeed, the NHA is familiar. The business my family started and that my wife run. I'm sorry? Oh, this was 1 second. Is this better? Can you hit? Does this sound better now? Yep. So indeed, the NHA is familiar. The business my family started and that my wife runs today, Nantucket House Antiques and Interior Design, has been located on the same block as the NHA for nearly 40 years, just around the corner. We are neighbors, as we all are on a small island. I was asked here today, as the title suggests, to talk with you about everything you want to know about affordable housing on Nantucket, and maybe some things you didn't. The operative word there is you. And I won't know what you want to know unless I hear from you. So think about what you would like me to address in a few minutes. I'm going to ask you about that. In the meantime, it was suggested to me that I talk a little about myself and why I'm here working on this issue today. I have a long history with Nantucket going back nearly 50 years. I grew up coming to Nantucket every summer since I was 3. This is my younger brother and I in front of our family's home on Broadway in Sconset around 1976. My parents moved our family here full time in 1980 when I was starting high school. Libby Gibson and I were in the same 9th grade class. Note that I have spared us both the embarrassment of showing a class photo here. I became aware of the housing issue because I experienced the housing issue firsthand. I'd moved back to Nantucket full-time with my own family 4 years before to take over the island business my parents had started. We endured the ubiquitous Nantucket shuffle, moving from place to place multiple times a year, 3 kids in tow, to cobble together a year-round living situation. I serve on the board of trustees for both the Community Foundation for Nantucket and the Nantucket Atheneum, where the workforce housing crisis perennially emerged as the #1 challenge facing the island. So it was clear that this was an issue the community was and still is wrestling with. And I probably somehow subconsciously decided a couple years ago that Dr. Seuss, the famous children's book author, was indeed correct. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to change. It's just not. I guess you could say at that point, I had a big idea that we could together somehow solve the workforce and affordable housing crisis on Nantucket and retain the soul of our island, its people. Not an easy thing to do in a place where the average home price is over $2.3 million. The cost of living is amongst the highest in the nation. And by way of dramatic contrast, the median income for a family of 4 is under $100,000. The Nantucket Project thought my big idea worthy of making me a scholar in 2016. I met with folks from a variety of constituencies, amongst them a West Coast housing expert introduced to me actually by an NHA board member. Doug is a seasonal resident here with an extraordinary housing pedigree, and he has been exceptionally generous with his time and insights advising both me and many boards here on the island. The first thing Doug said to me was, "You do understand you picked the most complex and challenging part of real estate and development or housing to get involved with." I'm not sure I fully appreciated that statement at the time. I knew I liked a challenge. When I co-led the effort to get a Nantucket license plate to benefit children's programs here, the state had laughed in our face when we came to them with the idea. But my co-chair, Robert Sarkeesian, and I were determined to do it with our team. The plates have now raised nearly $700,000 to date, benefiting 18 island nonprofits for their children's programming. We've effectively established an annuity to continue benefiting these worthy organizations for years to come. So I didn't understand anything about license plates when I got involved, other than that the RMV is located right across Broad Street. Yet somehow we figured it out. What I simply understood when it came to housing was that I just wanted to help my community. Housing is complex, as Doug noted. I could use the entire annual food for thought time allotment for every speaker combined, and I still couldn't address every facet of the topic if I stood here weekly speaking with you. So with a relatively short time together today, I won't attempt to try to explain LIHTC, financing stacks, area median income, 6FG, subsidized housing inventory, 40Bs, our CN zoning district, and a whole litany of housing acronyms and more, at least at the start of this conversation. If you would like to know more about any of these subjects, please bring them up in a few minutes, and I'll tell you what I know. And if I don't know the answer, I will endeavor to find it for you following our lunch together. In a way, it's not hard to understand why I felt driven to help here. If you understand what makes Nantucket so special, its natural beauty, its unspoiled architecture, its rich history, and its remote location, a place tucked in the corner of the world, as Melville described it, that is cared for and enhanced by its extraordinary people. And it's precisely the desirability of the former that together are eroding the latter, our people. So the NHA asked me to talk about what I've been doing. In the last couple of years, I've helped author legislation that was unanimously supported by town meeting and introduced at the State House. I've been asked by the administration to meet with our governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. senator, congressman, and multiple legislative representatives and elected leaders about the housing issue on Nantucket, helped drive the creation of 64 high-quality units of rental housing on town-owned land on Fairgrounds Road, been asked to co-chair a multi-million-dollar grant recommendation committee for the hospital's foundation here, and received a little recognition along the way. Yet, I don't really belong on this stage. The folks who are the backbone of our year-round community do. These folks, and many like them, are who make this community go, who sustain it, who enrich it, who are Nantucket. This is a group of Nantucketers, some of whom you may recognize, who joined me on stage at the Nantucket Project this fall. Some are in need of housing, some are part of the lucky few who have found decent, affordable housing, and some are part of the many people working on solutions. I and they would like to share some numbers with you. So 121 out of 490. This is the number of units presently on our subsidized housing inventory list that 10% number you hear about, and the number required by the state. 2,502. What a small business owner who was on stage pays monthly to rent a modest one-person apartment, and the number of weeks she once had to sleep on the floor of her unheated shop with an employee when they just could find no housing during the winter. 0. The percentage chance a long-time and active community member thinks she has of ever owning a home here. One plus one plus two. A hardworking islander who at one point had one child under one roof and her other child under another roof, working 2 jobs to try to keep a roof over all of their heads. 50. The percentage of income a valued teacher and her family spend on rental housing here. 1.6. What the housing bank bill would have generated last year to support workforce housing on the island if it had been enacted. 13 and 8. 13 is the number of times a local chef's son has moved during his 8 years growing up on Nantucket. 186 and 113. The number of qualified households on Housing Nantucket's ready-to-rent waiting list, which represents an increase of 113% since just June of 2016. 1, a lucky one, who won a lottery to get a Habitat for Humanity house. Countless. The number of people a local accountant has seen businesses lose after throwing in the housing towel. Good employees. These are just a few of the stories and represent hundreds more year-round Nantucketers. The whales we held on stage were meant to represent their stories. So I'd be remiss standing in this location if I didn't continue the metaphor. A century and 3/4 ago, the desirability of what whales offered man nearly drove them to extinction. Let us not let the same thing happen to Nantucket. On Nantucket, we've done so well conserving our natural beauty, our architecture, our history. Now let's conserve the soul of this island, the people who ultimately allow all of us to be here to enjoy this space, this food, this beauty, and this essential exchange of ideas. Thank you. And with that, I would gladly take questions and topics that you want to talk about.
You can walk around with a microphone, and you don't have to stand in the sun.
Okay. Oh, wait, actually, do we have that? Is this for?
You got
Do we
it.
have that?
You have it, yes. Yeah, so just turn it on. Hello, hello, hello? Takes a minute. There. Okay, so you can walk around and get out of the sun.
Hi, Tucker.
Hey, howdy.
Peter Hoey and Tom Nevers. 125 out of 490. Can you give us your best estimate of how that 125 number will rise over the next 2 to 3 years based upon what's on the books and currently and approved and under construction?
And I want to know that was not want you to know that was not a planted question, but I had a feeling it would come up. So the way our 10% is determined is by the decennial census. So in 2010, it was determined that Nantucket had 11,650 year-round residences, total residences or housing units. Of those, approximately 4,900 are year-round. So it's from that year-round number that the 10% is derived. So to Peter's question, the 121 is what is currently on our list as recognized by the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. There are presently 18 units which we can add today. A number that's maybe important to, well, I'll come to that in a second, but the number we have that we could add, let's say effectively tomorrow morning, is 18 units. What's in the works is the Richmond project, as we all know, 225 rental units, and then 17 home ownership units, which would qualify for the list, and then 6 Fairgrounds Road. So all 64 units at 6 Fairgrounds Road would be eligible to go on the list. That would bring our total to 445 toward the 490.
Thank you.
Yep.
What qualifies as affordable?
So to be on this list, it has to be restricted to folks who are earning 80% of area median income or less for Nantucket. And in Nantucket, that equates to around a household of 4, let's say, earning around $76,000, $77,000 a year.
And then to make it affordable, what is the actual cost that somebody must pay to either have a rental unit or to buy a home? In other words, how much are these units? So they qualify for the if they have $70,000.
Yes. Yeah.
But what do they have to outlay? What do we consider affordable for a rental or affordable for a house?
So, and this is not to not answer the question, but what I would like to do for anyone who is interested, I would like to email you the chart, because it differs by household size, what the rent limits are and what the income limits are. And rather than give you misinformation, so to speak, I'd rather give you the chart from the state. Yes.
I'm going to say something general, even though you won't. As a rule of thumb, the state doesn't like to see a family spending more than 30% of its income on its housing costs, which is rent and utilities, basic utilities. So that's a rough calculation, but Tucker will give you the actual numbers.
Just a comment. It's really horrendous what we see here, and I went through this process because I'm also a newcomer on island. I moved here 17 years ago. It's hello? Okay, sorry. It is interesting to reflect upon the fact that due to this high housing crisis, a lot of professionals suffer. And what I have in mind here is teachers, medical personnel at the hospital, professionals, sometimes working in nonprofit institutions like me. I work for the NHA. So is the town aware, or could this be a very important debate issue that continuing this, the quality of education, the quality of, attracting or bringing quality professionals to Nantucket will permanently diminish, and it will have really long-time consequences on the island. Thank you.
I agree with everything you said.
I was just wondering if you could shed a little more light on how a house is determined to be year-round. Is it just a box you check on the census, or are there criteria?
It's a very good question, and we're actually looking into that to understand it a bit more. The same question came up at a forum we held with Ilana Quirk from the town council's office, who's an expert in the 40B area. And it essentially is a self-identification from the census form, but what we're trying to understand is whether, that gets cross-referenced with, something further before the state ultimately is including it as our year-round number. So again, I would be happy to take your contact information and get you the definitive answer, but I understand right now that it's basically self-identification.
So it's just a box you check. It's not like, do you live here more than 6 months a year? Or I don't remember what I said on the census.
Yeah, exactly. It's on the form. Yeah. Yep.
Tucker, are Habitat for Humanity numbers in there?
Yeah, so this and I apologize if this is a little difficult to read from there, but this is a map, and again, I'm happy to circulate this. This is going to be on the town website, but this shows you, in particular, the larger affordable, both existing housing as well as planned housing, that's known in the pipeline around the island. In the corner, again, I apologize, it's a little difficult to read, but there are, in addition to those sort of particular projects, Housing Nantucket has 72 units that are rental units that are I think that's the Covenant program, So they have 72 individual Covenant houses, located, dispersed around the island. We're not identifying the particular locations of an individual resident on the map. But similarly, Habitat they have 10 houses that are either completed or under completion at the moment. And one of the things that we are doing is working with Habitat because, as you may know, they serve the 50% to 80% AMI level. And we are working with them to maybe tweak their lottery process so that it would enable them to be counted on the SHI list. But currently, they are not counted on that list.
I was just going to add that the assessors department they also look at if it's a year-round unit or not. So that might be something that you can cross-reference against the census.
Okay, thank you.
Could you go back to the last slide, please?
Yep.
So that year-round number, 4,896, how accurate do you think that is today?
I guess I would say this number was set as of 2010.
Right.
In terms of what is the year-round number today, existing, I don't know that it would have changed all that dramatically today. There obviously are some things, like larger projects that are being worked on that will ultimately influence the number. But what you have today is, in some neighborhoods that have been historically year-round, year-round residents, in recent years, you've seen sales of those homes or residences go to either investor or seasonal buyers. So they would drop, actually, from that year-round count. So on balance, I don't know if I could give you a good idea, but my gut is, of what has been built so far, that number wouldn't be dramatically different.
I just asked because basing the 10% off of that number, that's from 8 years ago, which seems kind of low. I would think that the town would do more work to try to get a more accurate number to base such an important number off of that data.
Well, the number's not set by the town, though. I mean, yes, that's, I think, to the earlier question, we want to understand what goes into it more to see if there is some area where we can probe on some questions and really make sure it is a fairly accurate reflection. But I'll throw a question to the audience. What do you think just your guess, what do you think the year-round population of the island is today?
14.
Yeah, so I think officially on the census it's probably like in the 11, 12 something range, but I think that's 18.5 is probably a pretty realistic number. So if you accept that and you say, the number of year-round units, that's on average, like 4 people per household on average. So it sort of feels like, that number, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't argue anyway today based on what I know that it's a high number, and it may in fact be a low number, which would only increase the 10% number at the next decennial census. Yes.
If someone has a house that was counted as one house, but now 8 years later, it's being rented by 3 families, is that considered 3 units or 1 unit?
Well, I can only give you my guess effectively today, but I would say it's probably considered 1 unit.
1 unit.
Yeah. I think it's got to have a separate address, like a separate postal delivery identification to be considered a separate address. Yes.
We've been talking about the year-round residents.
Yes.
What about the need for seasonal residents, the swell for that by all the shopkeepers and people on the island that own businesses?
So in terms of what kind of additional housing can we provide in order to support the
right,
business?
and are you looking at that number as well?
We are looking at it. The town does have some land where it was subdivided with a thought toward, for lack of a better word, like dormitory type of housing, seasonal, like truly more seasonal housing. But that is being looked at by the board in a kind of a greater master plan for the town-owned property. And so I would just say the emphasis has been on the year-round because we're so far behind on that particular topic. And it's the year-round that determines whether we're susceptible, if you will, to 40Bs and so forth, which is on a lot of people's minds these days. So that's been the focus. But the seasonal is on the list.
Part of the equation.
Yeah, it's part of the equation. Yes, exactly. Yes. I'm sorry? Yes.
With all the others that will be in existence within the next couple of years, the assumption is that they're not all going to be lived in year-round. They're not going to be year-rounders.
Right.
We all know that.
Not everyone, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be investors who are buying them or local people who buy them and then rent them out.
So, so with Richmond, 25% of those 225 rental units are restricted at 80% area median income. The rest are market. With Six Fairgrounds, and this was intentional by the Board of Selectmen and so forth, is 80% of those units are income restricted. And the developer was, I personally think, smart that they restricted them at levels other than 80%. So actually the biggest chunk in that development will be at 120% of AMI, because there are a lot of folks who have brought up that, 80, it's often tough to balance the income limitation with actually being able to afford it from a bank or financing perspective. So the Six Fairgrounds, 80% of those units will be income restricted, and thereby doing effectively, they have guaranteed that it will be locals who are occupying that. And I certainly would be encouraging more of that type of thing for any of these developments. And so, the Board of Selectmen last night was taking up a comment letter to the state regarding the proposed 40B on South Shore Road. And, so from my perspective as the housing specialist, like I think that that in its present form, it's too dense. But whatever might end up getting worked out between the neighbors, the town, and the developer, and I think a cooperative approach to it could end up with a good result. I'd like to see as many, 50% or more of the units restricted at different levels so that we are guaranteeing that they will go to year-rounders effectively. And in that particular case, with some of the product they're talking about offering, they may not even actually have to give up anything or very little financially to do that.
But then there basically is nothing to curtail it. I mean, I understand, because we'd all like that to be year-rounders, et cetera. The idea of it being year-round is perfect.
Yep.
But there's nothing really in place to stop it from being just an investment property and seasonal, aside from the few things you mentioned.
I'm sorry.
It seems there's an awful lot of properties out there that are being built and discussed, and the numbers of people that need housing is what basically we're guessing, though, because we don't know what the real numbers are, right?
Well, there are data points in the housing production plan. You gave a data point from Housing Nantucket in terms of the number of folks who are on their ready to rent list. There are additional 70 people who are qualified to purchase a covenant home, but there's nothing available in that category. So there is strong demand, I guess you could put it that way.
I guess my fear is that it's going to be another opportunity for, if Richmond or whomever builds these whatever number of units, and there'll be others too, that it'll end up with all these vacant barracks someplace, that nobody's living in except for 2 months of the year.
Right.
Which is nice for somebody who's making money on it, but it's not very good for the community or the infrastructure.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Well, the 40B is it's basically a very heavy stick that the state has to say, municipality, if you're not going to figure out your affordable housing situation yourself, then we're going to allow developers to come in and do it for you. So under the 40B program, basically they're allowed to a very great extent, like bypass, local zoning, bylaws, historic district review. I mean, in general, they can be unfriendly. They also can be good. I mean, you can have friendly 40Bs. And a great example on Nantucket might be Sachem's Path. That was done under the 40B process. I think a lot of people feel that served a real need. So it's, a lot of people hear the term 40B and immediately have a negative reaction to it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. But as was brought up, the requirement of the state is that only 25% are required to be affordable, and that means at the 80% level, the other 75% can be market rate. And I mean, that is what it is, whether, like, I personally would agree with that or not. Yeah.
A follow-on question.
Yeah.
Thank you. The size of this island is different from Medfield or somewhere else,
Yeah.
let's say. We all know that. The infrastructure is not in place, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so given all that as knowledge, why are we going by the same state rules for 40B development? And there's something I think we can argue. I think I've got a case. I mean,
So
we don't have the ferries, the gas stations, the car washes. Let's just be practical. Forget the real things. We don't have it. We're just not here. It's not here.
right, but we all are preaching to the choir to ourselves,
Right.
right? So we're not the only community that feels this way, even though we're probably, we're one of two communities that are islands.
Right.
And so that exact sentiment has been brought up to the legislature. I'm not going to get it exactly right off the top of my head, but I think in the last 4 or 5 years, and was universally, let's say, shot down. That, I'm not saying it's not worth continuing to make the argument and so forth, but it would be a legislative change to a law that's been around for decades.
So I think we need to start, instead of just sending letters to selectmen in the mass housing, it should be going to governor, our governor. I mean, because somebody has to recognize the difference between Nantucket and Cambridge. Let's face it, this is it's common sense.
You're right, but I think they're, rightly or wrongly, and I'm not arguing against it. Don't trust me.
No, I know.
I mean, my mantra since getting into this work a couple of years ago is I care as much about how it happens to that it happened. I mean, one of the first things I did in this work was pull the heads of the 3 conservation groups together to say, basically, I want to understand what you guys are working on, what's a priority to you. I want you to understand what I'm thinking about. I don't ever want to have any of us stand up at a public meeting and surprise each other. And, and they were like, this is great. Like, nobody's ever called us before and about this. And I was like, really? Like, you're the 3 largest landowners on the island. I'm kind of surprised. But Jim Lentowski, like, I always remember this, but he said, whatever you do, like, sort of in this field, the first one, make sure it's done right, because everybody's going to look at that and say, that's what you're going to get more of. So, I mean, I think we all care about trying to be able to have some control and say, and, and what things look like. I think we all care greatly. But I think, rightly or wrongly, there may be a perception up in Boston, looking down at Nantucket and saying, wow, like, there's a place with a lot of resources and a lot of smart folks year-round and seasonal. Like, they got to be able to figure this thing out. Like, I just don't know there's a sympathy for the island. It's more like, you got more than most, and you guys should probably be able to do this, rightly or wrongly. Yeah.
I agree. It's just because 30% of the houses are never used.
So, yeah, 64% of our total inventory is seasonal. Yeah. Yep.
So I'd like to just make a comment about the way I look at this. I serve on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and this issue, I moved here 4 years ago, I'm Brookmore, and we are between a rock and a hard place with the 40B legislation. That is our reality. As much as we'd love to lobby it to be changed, for the very, as far as I can see, future, we're locked in with what the state tells us we have to do. So I would like to see the town of Nantucket be more creative in using town assets to address what's a need. I mean, we have sort of numbers and statistics, but behind all this, there's people. There's people who are suffering. They're moving multiple times a year with their children. Since I've been on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I literally don't go 3 days without someone saying to me, I lost my housing. Can you help me? It happens to me all the time. That's what drives me in this process. And I just feel like 40B is something we should think about as a reminder to ourselves that we need to solve this problem. And if we do it on our own terms with projects like Fairgrounds Road, then we are taking control. And nobody likes apartment buildings. Nantucket's never had apartment buildings. If we'd started 30 years ago building small cluster developments, we might have been at 490, but we didn't. And here we are, and we're subject to proposals like Surfside Crossing that everybody finds abhorrent. But that's the reality, and I want everyone to really think about working within that reality and doing what we can as a community to allocate our tax dollars, our resources, to do this in a way that's a reasonable compromise, because people are suffering, and that's what drives me in this. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, like yesterday, it was like a tale of two cities where I looked on Facebook and saw in the year-round community, and someone had posted about, actually one of the people who their numbers were up here, the 1 and 1, who had lived with children under different roofs for a period. They finally just got awarded and closed on an affordable home in the happened to be the Beach Plum subdivision, and they were elated, and I was like, that's fantastic. Like, everyone loves to hear those stories. And then not an hour later, I'm getting a coffee and the person has a necklace around their chest that says, in need of housing. So I'm not sure where we are on time here, but okay.
So I didn't actually apply for this HM's Path housing, but from what I understood, a couple could only apply for what they could fill. A family would apply for more space. What can be done about younger couples or couples that are planning to have a family?
What can be done? We need a solution
in the process, in the application process.
Oh, and well, I don't know. I don't know that in that particular circumstance, the way that the lottery was run and so forth, how that might have been addressed. But, one of the things that is being looked at, and this actually, it was sort of born out of an idea. I don't want to put the person on the spot, but there's a person in the room actually who had brought up an idea about several years ago about kind of a campus for nonprofits, like on how for housing. Just because of the challenge, and to what the gentleman was saying in the back there, but a way to kind of come together and create a housing situation that might benefit the nonprofit community on the island, which I think is a great idea. But there's some talk now of, in some ways, extrapolating that to call it like our own local program of whether it's cottages, like Nantucket style, let's just call it that, and factoring the types of things that you're bringing up here into the mix, that is being offered. And I think some of those ideas were actually are being brought up to the parties that are proposing the 40B on South Shore Road. I think Matt Fee actually talked about it a little bit at the Board of Selectmen meeting publicly, last night. So I think like Dr. Seuss, like the only way something's going to change is, someone like you cares a whole awful lot. So like we need people to be involved and to keep bringing these ideas to, Ann Cuspa's here from Housing Nantucket and Brooke Moore from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And, any number of us, come to meetings, keep ideas coming forward, because that's how we're going to end up delivering what really the community needs. But I just say at the end there that the focus has obviously been on this reaching this SHI 10% target, just so that we can, it will be fulfilling a need, of course, but it also truly then allows us to chart our own course with anything that we want to do in this area, if that makes sense.
Can you just give an update on where it stands with the tax on affordable housing with the state?
The legislation? Yes. So I think actually, there we go. So the bill was originally passed at the 2016 annual town meeting, and got to a certain point during that session, then was... Sure. Yes, this is... We refer to it as the Housing Bank Bill. It's a home rule petition from the town for effectively a real estate transfer fee, much like the land bank. This is very much in the land bank model. The land bank has been extraordinarily supportive of this measure, has provided a lot of support in analysis and legal review and other things along the way here, letters of support to key members. And actually would be involved in certain aspects of when this got implemented, because they're already doing the collection on one side of the transaction, so that it would be easy for them to efficiently do it on the other side. So this bill was reauthorized at, if you will, at last year's annual town meeting unanimously. We've made some good progress with it in this current session, and it's currently in the House Committee on Bills in the third reading, which is basically the key hurdle to get through for a full vote of the House. And then, if that's favorable, it goes on to the Senate. And I think our legislative representatives have been great, Dylan Fernandez and Julian Sear, who are co-sponsors. And I think the thought process is, on the Senate side, actually, it may move rather quickly, but the key is to get it out of the House. And while we have broad support here on the island, the Massachusetts Association of Realtors off island is not, they kind of target these types of things. And much like they did with the land bank, when that was originally proposed, they said, this is horrible. It's going to sweep across the state. Every town's going to want one, and it's going to reduce real estate values, all evidence to the contrary. There are two land banks in the entire state. Surprise, surprise, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Real estate values have certainly not declined in either of those locations. So in a way, it's sort of this principle that they continue to hang their hat on, although I think everyone sort of recognizes there isn't really much to it. And there's been a broad group of folks who have gone up to the State House and testified on behalf of the bill. We've had some meetings more recently with smaller groups, with both the chair of the committee where the bill resides and with the Speaker of the House, and are working to. I think every now and then they give us an assignment, we come back and answer it. Sort of done everything that we've been asked to do, and we're going to see in the next few weeks here what happens. Yeah. And I'm sorry, and I didn't, it's 0.5%. So the land bank, as you know, is 2% paid by the buyer, basically on the first dollar. There are a handful of exemptions that relate to that. this is actually paid by the seller, 0.5% only on the amounts over $2 million. So in a $3 million transaction, it's 0.5% on $1 million or $5,000. Like, as the governor, when he was here and we were looking at this last summer, and he and the lieutenant governor seemed supportive of it, but he's like, it's a rounding error. I was like, exactly. In a place like this. So in Nantucket, so if you look at real estate values between when the land bank was enacted and now, nationally, real estate average home prices went up 135%. In Boston, which generally is considered to have been a fairly active, competitive market, it's gone up 550%. Over the same time period, Nantucket has gone up 876%. So it is truly a rounding error. And that's why we've actually, one of the assignments we were given was, we want to hear from some seasonal residents, sort of folks who would be affected by this transfer fee most likely, what do they think about it? So we've had some, I don't know a other way to say it but prominent seasonal residents who have contacted both the speaker and the chair to say, this needs to get done. So we've had, again, kind of broad support for the measure.
Can I add to that? The non-voting taxpayers have a group, and they have come out in support of this as well.
Yeah.
So that's important to note. And I guess my question to you, Tucker, is there anything that these folks in this room can do to help support that bill?
Great question. So, like right at the moment, I'm not sure there is anything to do, but it's sort of a stay tuned. Dylan and Julian have been, I think, artfully working the politics of it, and but it, you don't know. I wouldn't count on it, but we're certainly working hard on it.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, thank you very much, Tucker. This has really been great, very informative.
Thank you all. Thank you.
And for somebody who doesn't like to speak, you did a wonderful job. So thank you.